Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ivick. I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at eLearning Brothers. Today, we have a great session on learning technology and learning ecosystems. But first, I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. We'll send a copy of the recording out to you via email, so you can keep an eye out for that tomorrow. Closed captions are enabled. You can turn those on for yourself using the live transcript button that's usually at the bottom of your window in the Zoom toolbar. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to put those in the questions panel. We'll get to as many as we can live. If we can't get to your question, we'll do our best to follow up offline afterwards and get you that answer. We also have live chat, so feel free to say hello to the other attendees, tell us where you're joining from, share your thoughts on what the speakers are talking about. Our presenters today are Stephen Baer, Chief Creative Officer at the Game Agency, and Chris Bond, CEO, Bluewater Learning. We're very excited to have them here with us today. And so without further ado, Stephen, I'll let you and Chris take it away.
Well, super excited to be here. Thank you for attending, and thanks for hosting this, Stephanie. Today, we're going to go through some really fun stuff. Chris will kind of kick it off and walk through what we're going through, and we can get started.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Stephanie. Great to be here with everybody. We're going to focus on a couple of areas that really are impacting a lot of businesses and each of you individually today. We're going to talk about three distinct workforce groups and how we would approach learning or training with those individuals. We'll talk about how corporate pain points are really connected and enabled to those workforce groups. We'll give you some ideas about how to combat some of those pain points around learning, training, talent activities. We'll dive into some immersive assessments, how that can provide you more information and data about how you should be attacking those pain points. And then we'll finally move into looking at data as an understanding of effectiveness of your program. So lots for us to discuss. Really looking forward to the chat, Stephen, and to sharing quite a bit here. Looking forward to everybody's questions as well. So let's start off first by really looking at where we are from an industry perspective. And in terms of the industry, we know that there's been a war for talent for a number of years. We also know that jobs and skills are changing at a rapid pace. And so it's critical and important for us to look at the process of recruiting the right individuals, developing them well, and engaging them in a way that we can now turn around and recruit them again internally inside our organization. What we're seeing is that more and more organizations are turning and shifting from hiring externally to hiring internally. And as we do that, learning, training, talent development become a very, very critical resource to be able to use to help drive that engagement level, but also to be able to help people adapt to specific skills. So as Stephen and I take you through today, come back to this as your mental picture or image, that the idea that we want to help people be recruited properly, developed properly, engaged properly is important to not only the success of the organization, to your personal success, but it's very, very critical to that individual and how they see themselves within your organization.
One of the things before we jump off the slide that Chris and I have been talking about offline is building culture within organizations. And at the end of the day, I think one of the things that's really important is the more that we celebrate and we upskill our existing employees, the better the culture is going to be, the better the productivity is going to be, and the better the longevity is going to be. And so, when Chris talks about recruiting from internal, the best way you can do that is by investing them to begin with. And that's going to ultimately save you a lot of money in the long run. So that is definitely a theme to keep in mind.
Yeah, Stephen, I think that's a really great point there in talking about the investment, because there are different places where we can always put our investment in, not just money, but also in time. And I think the points that you're bringing out is that investment in people and who they will be as a part of your organization really pays benefits for a long time to come.
Yeah. So we've talked about in preparing for this, really three workforce groups. And, and we often talk about the in-person and the remote, but Chris kind of was jumping into the non-desk team. And maybe we can dig into that to begin with, Chris, because I think that that's something that's an unforgotten, or that's a forgotten group and is often not planned around.
Yeah, so three different workforce groups, as you're saying, Stephen. The first point I think that you and I both agree on is hybrid work environments are here to stay. It's something that we all are going to have to deal with and address and find out how we connect with and engage groups that are in different work settings. So clearly there's a lot of conversation about, well, we've got remote workers, very, very important, people that are in person at a desk, or non-desk workers. Now, this is Stephen, as you point out, is kind of the forgotten group. So a non-desk worker is somebody that might be anywhere from an airline pilot to a flight attendant to a maintenance worker at an airline to restaurant workers, those that are working in the kitchen, or servers, or front of restaurant staff. There are a lot of individuals that have that unique job to where their work location is a facility, but it's not necessarily going to be something that's sitting down at a desk. This is a different interaction that we begin to look at when we might consider that a remote worker, in many times, is going to be engaged through an electronic medium, through the computer, kind of like what we're doing today on webinar. But then you go look at those undesk workers, which represent over 60% of the work population in North America and over 70% globally, that you're going to reach them a lot by mobile devices. You're going to look at different ways to be able to engage them. How do we come together in that challenge and say, we've got to find a common way to reach all of them, or do we blend that together? How those pieces come together become really, really critical when we're talking about engagement of a learner. How do we really draw them into the process? So we've got common opportunity for skill development, common opportunity for being recruited into that new position, common opportunity for advancement within our business or our organization. Those non-desk workers are somebody they're near and dear to my heart because I interact with so many of them. I go out to a restaurant, I'm on an airplane, but they're also individuals that have just as great a need as a remote worker or a desk worker.
And the thing with that, this group also is, while they're going to be learning very specific skills that might only pertain to their role, they're also going to be learning things that you're going to be teaching, remote or desk workers, or in-person or remote workers, such as company history, or culture, or product information. And so you want to make sure that you are delivering it to them in a way or in a fashion that's going to work for their work situation, just as you would for someone who's sitting at a desk like I am today. The other thing to keep in mind is really level of education, right? Because ultimately, regardless of which of these three groups the person falls into, there are going to still be some commonalities in the type of training that you need to do across the organization. And you want to make sure that you're hitting really everyone in a way that they're best suited to learn and are going to be most engaged with your content.
Stephen, I really like your point on culture, because it would be very easy, especially in a learning and a talent world, to develop three unique cultures for learning just because they're diverse groups. But I think, as you and I talked about in preparation for this, that we've got to create this common learning culture, something that is unique to the organization, that addresses across educational boundaries, around kind of location boundaries, where they are and jobs, and begins to reach out in a different way. I think that's one of those big challenges that sits out there, is how do we resist that temptation to easily create three distinct learning cultures and create one?
Right. Completely agree. One of the things we've talked about is the corporate pain points, and especially the one all the way to the right was the one that, as we were thinking about this presentation, I think is one that we're all trying to get our heads around, is rapid change, right? In the last 2 years, the way we do business has changed dramatically. And as we think about historically, historically meaning 5 years ago, we talked about that in 15, 20, 30 years from now, there'll be lots of jobs that don't exist today that will be the workplace. Well, that's happening at a rapid speed, and the way that we're working is changing dramatically. And so that's something that I think all companies are trying to keep up with. I think another thing that we're all dealing with is trying to think about, in this new world order, how do we build a culture that is really going to make people feel like they're part of an organization? And that's really tough right now when people are not sitting, next to each other. They're not talking to each other beyond a screen. So I think that's a really important thing. We all know with the Great Resignation, there's humongous attrition right now, and obviously in some subsets more than others. But it's definitely an issue that a lot of organizations are focused on. When I think about any of these 6 pain points, or I think about others that we haven't identified on this screen, one of the things I think is really critical for everyone here to be thinking about is, as learning and development professionals, we have the opportunity to really create the most ROI and certainly the most profit for our organization if we focus on these and some of the other critical KPIs for a company's existence. And I feel like we're all set up to really conquer each of these and make sure that that whether it's a matter of process or product knowledge or culture or upskilling, at the end of the day, we're able to set the tone for the success of a company, probably more than any other function within an organization.
Yeah, I would agree, Stephen. And I think a couple of things just to pull out from what you were talking about. When we look at the items that are on the screen right now, certainly we experienced this during the pandemic and rapid change, but these items were really beginning to happen to us before the pandemic started, because we could see in 2018 or 19 there beginning to be a lot of job shift, that the change was happening rapidly, that there was more demand and pressure on L&D to go achieve things, that the culture issue, I think, is something during the 2010s or teens, however we say that, now that we're in the 2020s, poor culture, unsatisfied customers. These were things that were beginning to evolve because there was so much more awareness. So I love your thought on how do we begin to establish really the metrics around how we measure this change, because it's something I believe it's not going away. It's going to be here with us for a long, long period of time, that we are going to have to deal with the rapid change, the high attrition, the changes in business, and the challenges of culture as well.
And I think it's also, as we put our, as L&D professionals, we kind of put our business hats on and think about what's our place with the organization. I feel as we're successfully conquering each of these, or identifying solutions for each of these, we're really making a place for ourselves in the C-suite, because ultimately these problems being solved is what's going to make any company successful in the long run.
Absolutely. And I love your point about that the learning and talent professional has as big an opportunity to have an impact or to make a change for a business in that than anybody else in the organization.
Yeah, it's true. So these are some interesting stats. Chris, do you want to walk us through some of these as far as pain points overall?
Yeah, I think when we look at the pain points, we've talked about this a little bit already. The speed to readiness that's required right now is just amazing. And the rapid change, I know for our clients in terms of job changes, is happening at such a pace that it's almost difficult to predict what skills or capabilities are going to be required 6 to 9 months from now. But as Steve and I are preparing again for this, we started to look into some different information to really look at the pain points specifically, and some statistics or data that began to help us. So not only speed and readiness, we need to help employees see what's possible for them in the future. There's a lot of feedback that says, prepare me for the future. I want to be with your company. Help prepare me. And as I just mentioned, upskilling is really hard if the job is changing every 6 months. So we look at the variety of the data, and the data is all telling us that whether you're an organization, you're somebody running an organization, or you're an individual employee inside the business, that process of upskilling, of giving more information, of giving me more capability to do my job is one of, if not the most critical connecting point or engagement point for individuals inside an organization. And we even see that the last stat there on Gen Z and millennials really looking at upskilling as that something that is not just given to them, but it's a request. They're reaching out. They're trying to find more. And I think organizationally, we look at that and say that then we've got to go focus as a leader in the organization on the opportunity, the ability to go provide more skill-based training, education that will help us proceed through and make our work environments much more palatable, because we're not chasing after what we ought to be doing next, but we're actually driving what's next because we've got the right skills in place. So I love the fact that studies are coming back and they're very, very consistent. Upskilling is absolutely critical to the future for an employee and for an employer.
One of the things to keep in mind as we're doing this upskilling is the historical form of training of let me teach and then let me test, I think needs to go by the wayside. I really believe that immersive assessments are critical, and they come in all shapes and sizes, by the way. But I'm defining immersive assessments not as putting goggles on, although that is one way of doing it, but rather about putting that learner into a situation and making them assessing what they know as they're doing it, right? So whether you're ultimately focusing on things like recall or categorization or emphasizing or articulation or decoding things or visual learning or many other forms of learning, the more that you can put that learner into the environment and see the decisions they're making along the way, course correct them along the way. Feedback is critical, and the more that they can learn in a very safe environment, the more that they're going to be effective in putting those skills into place in the field. So we talk about, there are obviously many modalities to do this, but we believe that three that deserve some real discussion points today are utilizing games, virtual reality, and video coaching. And, just to kind of put a visual to all of those, this can look, once again, like anything. But on the left-hand side, we're showing an example of a game. This is a branching dialogue where you're working with another character. It might be overcoming, sales objections rather, or talking to, patients through a very difficult conversation, or anything on the, soft skills side, right? And might be management training, it might be customer service, it might be negotiations, but going down different paths, trying out certain things, seeing what the repercussions of your decisions are, and seeing, what the outcomes are going to be based off of the decisions you're making. The middle image here is an example of a virtual reality simulation. Let me invite you into this virtual world. Let me bring you through all these different things. Let me introduce you to these characters. Let me have you take on these activities. And by the way, while you're here, let me give you additional multimedia that you can engage with. And that is something that I think, when we think about how we consume content as consumers, is something that we're all doing in our day-to-day world, and certainly is just as relevant in our work world. The last image on the right-hand side is showing about video coaching. Video coaching, I think, is critical. And why is it critical? I think that one is whether it's using your computer or using your mobile device, ultimately giving somebody certain message points that they need to deliver. Looking at the way that the words that they're using, the ums that they're using, the uhs they're using, right? The eye contact they're using, giving them automatic feedback, which I think we all want. We want real-time automatic feedback on how we're doing, and then delivering that to their manager to be able to look at to give some real additional feedback is, I think, critical. So I wanted to start with these. Chris, I don't know if you want to weigh in on these examples.
Yeah, I think one of the points here, Stephen, is the experience inside learning is critical to the engagement. We can't just provide standard learning that we provided 5 years ago or 7 years ago and expect to create engagement. We may create learning, but the engagement becomes critical. And I think beginning to look at tools along the lines of games and virtual reality, video coaching, and there's a number of other systems and technologies that can help you with this, how you create that experience becomes very, very critical. And look, I'm an early Gen Xer, so I was on the early side of that. And even in my world, I'm looking for something that's going to be engaging me in learning. I mean, I'm reading and learning all the time, and sometimes I'll go through things that are honestly not connecting with me because there's not that level of engagement, and so I move on from that activity. And I know that if I'm doing that, then there's many others that are doing that as well. We've got to immerse or capture people in a way that gives them the opportunity to not just learn once, but learn multiple times in multiple modalities as well. We can't just find ourselves in a position of, hey, I'm just going to build e-learning content, I'm going to put it out there, or begin to say everything we're going to do is in the classroom. It's got to be something that creates a unique experience. And I think as a part of the impact on your organization, you need to be considering what that unique experience is for you. From company A to company B, for each of you, you've got to go create your own model of that experience and use the right tools to be able to help you get into that mix. The idea here is not to make it complicated, but to make it simple, but simple in a way that creates, again, your own experience for your particular organization when you look at learning.
One thing, Chris, that you said I want to hone in on a little bit is repetition, right? With all three of these modalities, whether it's a game that someone might want to come back to because they want to perform better, or it's maybe more of a virtual world that someone wants to come back and they want to explore different parts, or it's a video coaching simulation where someone's going to practice over and over again until they get to a score that is considered, high enough that they're satisfied and their manager satisfied. With all three of these modalities, there's that level of repetition, and with repetition, it's going to drill that information into our brains. So that's one thing to think about. And I talk about this certainly from the lens of gameplay a lot, but it's just as relevant when it comes to any three of these modalities. It's pretty rare that learners come to their trainers and say, gosh, I'd love to take your course 3 or 4 times. But the reality is with these modalities, that's happening on its own, right? And I think that the more that we can deliver content in a way that our learners are consuming it in their day-to-day real lives outside the office, the more that it's going to be effective, because that's just how they want to engage with content, period.
Yeah, and Stephen, I think one of the points of this particular webinar is to talk about the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is going to look of learning, and learning technology is going to look at multiple applications, multiple methods that need to find a way to be able to coexist and work together. I think gone are the days that we're looking at one application that's going to be able to solve all problems. We have to look at an ecosystem that has different elements to that, whether you've got heavy compliance training, or you need to be learning new skills, or even just in time learning. How can I begin to go get those skills on an as needed basis? It's really this creation, and I know we talked a little bit about it, was how do you create this ecosystem of different technologies, of different content, different capabilities that engage people in unique ways that are going to connect with their learning style or their learning habits, or meet them in a moment of need that's critical. So the idea of, hey, I'm just going to go buy one system and that one system is going to go solve all my problems. I got one vendor, they do everything for me. I think that doesn't exist because there's not the possibility that a single vendor keeps up with all the capabilities. It's really going to have to be a meshing in an ecosystem of multiple pieces that allow you get to the next point. So as you're talking, Stephen, I'm sitting here thinking about, yeah, there's places where games are absolutely going to work. And there's organizations where virtual reality, that's something that will have a bigger, broader impact than in other organizations. And I think video coaching should apply across the board with everybody, especially as we're working on onboarding and looking at how we bring new people into the organization. How do we interact and connect in a way that, again, immerses or engages learners and individual employees early is really, really important.
I couldn't agree more. This next slide is either going to feel overwhelming to all of you, or it will, which by the way, it doesn't look very overwhelming right now, but it will be, or it will be inspiring, and hopefully the latter of the two. One of the things that I really believe is, regardless of the modality, when it comes to immersive assessments, there are a lot of things that we need to keep in mind, and when from an instructional design perspective. And the nice thing is that you can build all this stuff yourself, or you can leverage tools out there that have a lot of this framework already built. So let's talk about those things. I believe that any immersive assessment is going to require some sort of rule set. You need to set the stage for the learner so they understand what do they need to do. You want to build a theme, something that's compelling and something that they can relate to. And when it comes to something they can relate to, a storyline is just as important. You want to make sure that it's something that they can remember and they can reflect on and think about characters or situations and apply it to their day-to-day real world. Aesthetically, you want it to make sure that it's visually appealing. You want to make sure that it, once again, as we think about the way that people engage with content today, people have a high standard of what they expect, and you want to make sure that your learning addresses that. You want to build some sort of conflict. What am I fighting against, or what am I trying to accomplish here, right? You also want to make sure that you're thinking about a level of collaboration or competition among your players, right? Do you want this to be a single player experience where someone is just trying to do something? Do you want to bring people together? Do you want to build leaderboards? What do you want to do to set the stage? What's the strategy for the learner, right? You want to make sure that they understand that not only is there a rule set and a theme, but ultimately there's a strategy they need to implement to be successful. And obviously the strategy is built around the goals that you're setting. What resources do they have available to them? And this is a great opportunity for you to think about how to, in a virtual immersive assessment, build out the types of resources that they're going to want to utilize in their day-to-day work environment. Is this about chance, or is this about skill? And ultimately, I imagine most of these are going to be about building skill set and upskilling your employees. Do you want to put time pressures? How realistic do you want it to be? Do you want it to be representative of the time pressures that exist in real world? What type of feedback do you want to give them along the way? The level of points and leaderboards or levels, and ultimately, what type of rewards do you want to give them? Now, like I said, this hopefully is more on the inspiring side, that this is saying, as I'm building immersive assessments, this is a roadmap for the things that I need to keep in mind. I want you to remember that there are lots of tools out there that have a lot of these things built into them. And if you're going to build it from scratch, I would just keep in mind as many, if not all of these, as you can. Chris, anything to add on this slide?
Oh boy, how much time do we have? There's a lot. There's a lot to add here. I think the point that you're making here, Stephen. Yes, this is overwhelming that we actually have to keep track of all this, and I think that requires prior planning. If we're planning out what our engagement level is with employees, then that becomes very critical. We need to know what's our end result or our end game. And I think you've got that represented here. But each of these points become, I think, really important and also shareable across multiple pieces of technology, because your collaboration does not have to happen in the same place that you're applying your story and your aesthetics and your conflict. Do we have competitive games? How do we work through those elements? These are things that you have to build up over a period of time. And I don't think in any way, shape, or form are Stephen or myself recommending, hey, you've got to go do all this tomorrow to be effective. This is something you have to build up over a period of time. One other thing that I kind of triggered my thoughts as you're going through this, Stephen, there are a number of organizations that are out there that are doing what I call extended enterprise training. We're either going out to customers. There is a lot of training that goes out to partners. We're training on technology, on process. We're trying to develop people internally, but we're also looking at how that development of people externally can impact our business. And I think these same rules apply when you begin to think about how do we engage external groups. In fact, the competition one I think about, we have a client that is a franchisee. And so a lot of external learners, and as they're going through the process, what they found was, and it was a retail food service environment, they found they could create competition between each of the franchisees and each of the stores. The level of engagement was immense. And so it's kind of a pre and post evaluation of that. Before they said, hey, we're going to have each of the stores compete with each other, there was limited engagement. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to allow the stores to be able to compete with each other in a way that's going to help them move through that story, understand the conflict, create some internal store collaboration, and then get recognized for the results of that competition. It was amazing the difference it made in the business. And they were also able to track it back to what was going on inside the financials of the business, how that was improving same store sales, efficiencies, cost of production, those elements. It was amazing to see how just pulling some of these pieces together, both inside and outside the organization, worked. One of the things they did, which was kind of interesting, they have 1,000 different stores, and on their feedback mechanism, how they were giving points, how they were rolling out all of this, they were only showing a limited number of people in terms of the competition. So you got 1,000 stores, but they only show the top 5 or top 10 in terms of results. Why? Because everybody wanted to be in the top 5 or top 10, both from a learning standpoint, from a business standpoint, all of that together. And I'll just roll that back to say, hey, this kind of comes back to one thing. We've got to be able to communicate a message that's aligned with the business, that promotes development of individuals so they can create great results for themselves and the organizations we work with, which is why I think, Stephen, what you're representing here is absolutely critical.
Ultimately, if you have the right solution, you're going to get a tremendous amount of data, right? And that example that Chris gave is probably a perfect one, right? Because not only can they do some pre-testing and post-testing, but they can look at, hopefully, how individuals are performing, how groups are performing. They can probably look beyond just knowledge. They can look at personas of their learners, and they can start to think about the individual choices and the processes that the players make, that the risk tolerance that people have. All this type of data is so critical in being able to then formulate more impactful training, and to take your existing, kind of going back to what we said early on in this in this presentation, taking your existing employees, upskilling them, and almost positioning them for their next role within your organization.
Yeah, the data that we get out of technology and out of this ecosystem of technology, to me, is such an incredibly valuable asset. How we use that information to help inform the business on what's working, what's not working, or inform the individual on how you're doing, how you can improve, or what the future looks like, is critical. And so that tracking of effectiveness, and I know, Stephen, this has been one of these elusive things in all the years that I've been in the learning and development world, is well, how do we measure effectiveness? It's not course completion. It's got to be something that's different. And I think the organizations that we're seeing success with, they're engaging learners in a unique way to where it truly is about engagement, and measuring that engagement actually is showing better proof of knowledge and knowledge retention than just saying, yeah, I completed the test and I got a 90 on the score. So I'm just curious, to a lot of those of you that are out here today, what are some of the ways that you see great measurement of data and engagement? Because this is a place that we need to learn from each other. And I think we need to press each other a little bit more as an industry to find different ways to measure and give feedback.
And I'll add one more question to the group on that very topic, which is, we historically have all used SCORM data, which is okay. But, the reality is XAPI data, if we're actually really tying it to our business and we're able to analyze the impact of our training and the effectiveness it's having on different parts of our business, is even better. And I'm curious how many people here, if anyone, is doing that, because that's another area that I think that as an industry, we can all grow. So with that, I'm going to suggest we move over to some Q&A and some discussion, and we can open up the conversation among everyone attending.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both of you. So one of the common questions that we've been getting is how to get buy-in for virtual reality, because it is a newer technology. A lot of people have the assumption that it's very expensive. Can you give us some recommendations, Stephen? Share how we've convinced some of our clients, ways to make it less expensive.
Yeah, well, there are a few parts to that. One is, I think one of the barriers that people have to virtual reality is thinking, do I need to go out and buy 5,000 goggles for all my employees, right? And the reality is that that is a way of deploying virtual reality, but you don't need to do that, right? You can use your everyday computer screen or even your mobile device. So that is an option too. So I want to kind of set aside that concern that people have. The next thing is trying to think about, how do I build it, right? There are obviously lots of companies out there who do custom virtual reality work. We happen to be one of them, but you don't need necessarily to leverage a team if you want to build it yourself. This is a product pitch part. There is a tool that we utilize and we own, which is called CenarioVR, and it is a rapid authoring tool. And I always say this literally: if I can build it, anyone can build it. And I've built now a handful of VR simulations using CenarioVR. It's really, really easy. And I encourage you to do a trial, try something like that, because, and if not that product, try another one, because ultimately these are easy barriers to overcome. And I think that putting some of those things in front of people, I think, are easy as well. Jen, if you have easily available the video with some of the CenarioVR examples, maybe you can put it in here in this chat.
Awesome. That's great. That kind of answered another one of the questions, which was, how do you start building virtual reality? So the answer is free trial of CenarioVR or a similar product.
But I also think that a part of it is, and Chris, please weigh in on this. I think part of it goes back to that eye chart of a slide that I had, right? Which is really the planning, thinking about what are you using it for? What stories do you want to tell? What interactions do you want someone to do? What do you want to guide that individual learner or sets of learners to do within there? And whether it's rule sets, themes, stories, level of competition, or goals, so on and so forth. I would start to map all of that on paper, right? Because the reality is that once you have that idea, I think you can put it into place, like Stephanie was saying, relatively easily.
Yeah, I think the view and vision of a lot of the learning tools out there is that they're pretty pricey. When you take that and turn that a little bit differently, and you look at the value that you get out of some of these tools, and you look at the price point versus the value, there's a dramatic shift. Because I think some of the gaming, the virtual reality tools, some of the virtual coaching tools we've talked about, even looking at the cost and price of learning management systems, LXPs, those type of things, the value that you can go measure against that, I think dramatically outweighs what the cost is. And I think that's where we're getting to on the VR side, is the ability to immerse somebody in that experience in a unique way, depending on what the job or the role is. But I can just think through manufacturing. I know some of the airlines we work with are doing VR training in a variety of activities. In the amount of money that it's saving, the time to competency is decreasing dramatically in some of those efforts, where you're able to test and go through assessments and then prove yourself, or retest or go through the game. I think those elements, you begin to look at, again, that time to competency, reducing at a dramatic pace, especially from an onboarding perspective, becomes really, really important. To me, the price of the tools and those things are coming down so much in relationship to what the price for other technology is out in the marketplace. I think learning tools and learning technology are absolutely at a value price compared to the impact that they have on the organization if used properly.
That's great. And then kind of tying into impact, could you share a few of the key metrics that you would recommend organizations use to measure engagement and net training effectiveness?
Yeah, let's, Stephen, if I could start out on that one, I would love your thoughts on that one as well. One of the metrics that we really look at is repeatability of engagement with a learner. So certainly, if I'm in a position where I'm doing a lot of heavy compliance training, I'm not going to have people wanting to go back through compliance training over and over again. However, if I'm focused on skill development, just-in-time learning, any of those activities that are going to help me build immediate competency, I want to know how much time people are actually spending going through and repeating and coming back to the tools and coming back to that set of understanding. And it's not just about going back to one course, but it's going back to a system or a capability around knowledge. And if I've got the right learning that's out there, and then I can come back to that on a regular basis, that consistency or repeatability of engagement with those activities is something that I would absolutely measure. If you're seeing low activity there, then you've got to ask the question, do I have the right content? Do I have too much content? Is my content framed around the right amount of time? Do I have engagement in that content to be able to drive that particular activity? The second one that I would focus on is, what's my match of a training activity back to an organizational business objective? So what am I trying to do inside my organization? What is the CEO laid out as goals? And how am I doing to begin to impact that? Now, that doesn't really have to be a one-for-one dollar swap or any of that type of thing, but how can I show that I've got 4, 5, 10, 20 different courses that are focused on, or pieces of content that are focused on a business activity? And then how do I take that information and then very simply go measure that against organizations or departments and what their impact towards a business goal is? A lot of organizations are doing a lot of measurement around those business goals. Adding in your impact from a learning and training standpoint, not that difficult. The third is, are you providing the right data to managers so they can make decisions to help benefit their employees, or from an extended enterprise, those who are actually helping sell or deliver your product externally, or finally customers? Looking at that data, am I providing the right data to the organization, is an important metric. How do you engage in that? It's really about going out and doing employee engagement, doing customer client engagement surveys, and making sure that there's a lot of activity that's going on in regards to utilization of data. And sometimes you have to go train people on how to use the data that you're giving to them so that they can go impact that part of the business.
I think those are all really good points. There are two I probably want to just reiterate or at least build upon. The one is thinking about the length of your training, right? We didn't really talk about, the micro mindset, but at the end of the day, we are all so darn distracted today, and we have a relatively low attention span. So the more impactful you can make your training in short periods of time, the better. And quite honestly, there's a good chance you're going to get someone to come back and engage with it again and again and again if it feels like a bite-sized piece of content. The other thing I think that is worth just kind of focusing on just a little bit further is the data that you're pulling about your learners, right? Ultimately, it's long gone are the days of just checking a box of Stephen did this and he passed. That doesn't mean much anymore, right? We live in a data-rich world, so being able to understand not just that Stephen passed this, but what do we know about him? We know that he's come in multiple times. He's tried this. This is where he's excelled. This is the areas he's really has a gap. Maybe we understand that he has a high risk tolerance, or he has really good soft skills, or that that he's eager to please, or whatever. But we want to make sure that we're collecting as much information on our learners and assessing them throughout, not just saying, I'm going to teach you and test you, but I'm going to deliver my content in a format that I'm going to be able to garner a lot of information about you as a learner. And the more that I have that, the more I'm going to be able to set you as a learner up for success in my organization.
Yeah, I think, Stephen, you hit on an important point that I don't know that we've addressed yet, which is, how do I begin looking at that data, help me tailor the experience to the learner in a way that engages them further and is able to consume more and more information. So that's going to be a critical element moving forward, is using data to tailor the learning experience, because it's unique. It may be different. It's different for Stephanie versus Stephen versus Chris versus anybody else that's out there. The more that we can tailor that experience, I think the better engagement we're going to get.
Great answers, great suggestions. We have a couple more questions specifically about integrating CVR scenarios made from CenarioVR. Sorry, we call it CVR internally. So if you've created a learning activity in CenarioVR, Bill wants to know, how do you get that to play in something like the Oculus Quest?
So Chris, I don't know if you,
that question if you don't know, Stephen.
I haven't done it. I believe it's a publishable output that we have. We have it publishable, I believe, out to something like 15 different headsets. So
yes, so there's a native CenarioVR app in the Oculus Quest app library, and you would just publish it to the CenarioVR platform, and it's accessible in the app. Very easy. And then we also had a question about how to launch VR training through an LMS and still be able to measure and analyze. Can you speak to that, Stephen or Chris?
Yeah, so certainly can do a SCORM output, and just as you can publish as a SCORM package and layer it right into any learning management system. And that's one of the things that we really focus on with all of our tools, is to make sure that whatever you're building it in, one, you can build it in any tool, any modality, as easily as you could build a course in any of the rapid authoring tools. We want to make sure it's that easy, but we also want to make sure that it is that all of our tools are publishable and really can go wherever you want, right? So, and that that's trackable no matter what platform you're using. So I don't know, Stephanie, if that answers the question sufficiently.
Yeah, I think there's a big question in there also about the level of integration and how do we use those different tools. And as I look at that, one of the things that I would encourage everybody to look at is that integration is critical when looking at these pieces of technology and how we're going to deliver. So it's a different strategy. It's not something that a typical learning leader would have had to deal with 5 years ago. Definitely not 10 years ago. But I will tell you, from my experience right now in our organization, we have more and more integrations going on between learning management systems, LXPs. We even have some of the eLearning Brothers technology that we're integrating with other systems, just to be able to provide that sharing of information and data, and then the rapid deployment of content as well. We mentioned how quickly things are changing. And if it takes too much time to go publish a piece of content, get it to an LMS, get it in front of a learner, then we're going to lose some effectiveness. That level of integration is something that honestly is becoming easier and easier and easier. There's a lot of all the different technology vendors that are diving into iPaaS solutions and how do we integrate in different elements of the cloud. It's something I'm very passionate about, that we've got to get that integrated. We've got to begin sharing data in order to perfect all the things that we're working with in terms of learning technology.
One more thing on this topic is, you think about any of these tools and really any web-based authoring tool, whether it is courseware, VR, gameplay, so on and so forth, to be able to update it real time and to be able to have those updates available in your learning management system or your LXP real time are critical, right? Because ultimately, if we're doing our jobs correctly, not only are we building content that hopefully is pushing the limits a little bit, but we're really mining the data and seeing what can we learn from that and where do we need to make little tweaks along the way. And so, kind of to Chris's point, it shouldn't be about, let me build it and then go through a process that's 10 steps long to get it available to someone. It's, let me build it, let me publish it. Oh, by the way, now I need to make some change because I went through my little focus group and I can change this in 10 minutes and it's updated. So that's what we all need to be thinking about, because that's the world of immediacy that we all live in.
Yeah, almost all the vendors that are out there are building APIs to be able to integrate, connect with iPaaS vendors. There's a lot. If anybody wants to reach out, I can give you a whole host of different resources and talk about different ways to be able to integrate those different technologies and applications together. We're even seeing different LMS vendors integrate with each other, LXPs integrate with each other. So it's not a, it's just this vendor works with. Everybody's trying to find a way to be able to get in there and share that information and data. And I know one of the things we haven't talked a lot about here, because we were focused a lot more on content, but when we get into technology and think about content and the future of AI or machine learning against how content's going to be used, AI is only going to work if we get it the right data, which says we've got to integrate all the information in order to be able to help AI produce the right set of results to tailor things for learners. And then again, that data becomes critical to the content developer, the one who's theorizing what we're going to do from a learning standpoint, to make those tweaks, Stephen, that you talked about so quickly, so we can get it back online and provide that learning that's going to make a real difference for that individual.
That's a great segue, Chris, because my next question was going to be, what is the role of AI in the face of today's corporate pain points? So you kind of touched on that already. Stephen, if you want to weigh in and add anything, go ahead.
Chris, do you want to add anything else? I have some thoughts on it. I don't want to jump on that.
No, on the AI side, AI is great and helpful, but it has to be trained. And so as we look at AI technologies that are out there today that have a lot of great promise, know that there's a lot of effort associated with that promise. We have to know our roles. We got to attach skills to roles. We got to attach skills to content. There's a really big project that's got to go on. And so this is going to evolve over time. But AI is there to really help us reach and connect with an individual learner, no matter where they are or what their role is, whether, again, they're extended enterprise, they're an employee, they're a manager, they're an executive, doesn't matter who they are. It should be a helper to us. It's not going to do a lot of the job for us today. In the future, if we train it correctly, it can have a massive impact on our industry and really help us reach more individuals more frequently.
The only thing I would add to that is I'm a data geek, so I definitely think that there's a lot to AI, but to Chris's point, it takes time, it takes effort. You got to roll up your sleeves and really put the work in. And the other thing to keep in mind is that it's more useful in larger organizations, right? Because you need large data sets to make it worthwhile and to train it properly. If you have a small data set, it's just not going to be worth the effort. I'm always happy to talk about AI on the side because I think that there's a lot of potential there, and there's a lot of stuff that's being done today that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you guys so much. Those are all the questions we have right now. I'll give it just another minute to see if anyone wants to submit any last minute questions for you too. But thank you both so much. As you can see on the screen that Stephen is sharing, that's contact information for Stephen and Chris and their LinkedIn profiles. If you want to connect, ask them any more burning questions about learning technologies, integrating those together, what their favorite color is, etc. And I don't see any more questions coming in. So I will just say again, thank you everyone for joining us. Oh, any recommendations, top LMSs best for integrations? That's a loaded question.
That is a loaded question.
That might be a whole other webinar.
I'm gonna give you an answer on that. It depends. And that's my good consulting answer. I would say if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to take you through what we know. It does depend on what you're looking to integrate with as to which platform is better. Some have a lot of open APIs. Some are very focused in their own technology for integration. So just depends on exactly what you're trying to do, but love to have a conversation with you offline on that.
The famous "it depends" answer. That's a perfect note to end the webinar on. Yeah, but actually we're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat for sharing all of this information and that this was helpful and everyone has learned a lot. I know I learned a ton. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. And thank you so much, Chris and Stephen, for taking the time to share all this with us today. And hopefully we will see everyone on a future webinar.